Hi, my name is Emily. I'm the nursery coordinator here with Tree People. So what we do here at the nursery is grow a high diversity of local Southern California native plants. And this is important in order to create a highly diverse, very resilient native ecosystem in the area. When discussing fires happening here in Southern California, what is happening is that they're occurring at a much higher rate and a much higher intensity than they naturally do. Now, the reason for that is primarily the invasive species. So these are invasive species such as ripgut brome, black mustard, and wild radishes. What happens with these is they will form very dense monocultures. Now, monoculture is when you have one kind of plant forming just a very large community. And they grow very big and very quickly, and they soak up all the water and then get very tall and die in the fall, so right about now. Now, they will get so tall that, let's say, mustard can be like taller than me, which isn't saying much, but they can get like 6 feet tall. And what happens for that is when you start a fire, you know that you can't really just hold like a match or a lighter up to a log and expect to get a fire. Instead, you need to have a smaller fuel source. And so in this case, the smaller fuel source will be the various invasive plants. So what we need to do in order to prevent that is clear all that brush away. And this is a common thing that's being done. People will clear it away from the sides of roads, from buildings. But if you don't replace it with anything, you're going to have to keep removing that brush year after year because they have plenty of seeds that they're going to drop and nothing will take their place. So what we need to do is restore the native ecology, and that's going to be all these plants that we're growing right here. And so this ecology is much better fire adapted, and it's going to be much more resilient to fires when they actually naturally happen. So Southern California native plants have many different ways of being fire resilient. One of them is that they will what we call crown sprout. So that means when a fire comes through, and this is for a lot of like larger shrubs, they'll burn all the top growth and it'll look dead for a little bit, and then from its very base, what's called its crown, it will sprout up again with a lot of new growth, and it'll actually be like very happy, vigorous new growth. So the plant is still alive as long as its roots were intact, it'll be okay. So an example of that is the laurel sumac. It will send its roots up to 40 feet down into the ground. And then when it is burned by the fire, it has such a robust root system that it's able to come right back. So these are very frequent on super steep hillsides. So these will come right back. And that's really important because they can prevent serious erosion from happening after fires come through. So what happens a lot of the time in Southern California is we'll get mudslides after fires when they burn through everything. But if you have things like the laurel sumac, it'll have such a strong root structure into the earth that it will keep serious mudslides from happening. So other species can have adaptations like having very thick waxy leaves. You can see this with our Quercus agrifolia, the coast live oak. What these are able to do is basically just kind of be less likely to light on fire if they have a very high water content. Now, oaks are also very good at resisting fires because they'll have very thick bark that's very difficult to get through. And also when they get to a certain height, many of their leaves can actually escape lower burning fires. Other ways in which species can be fire adapted is that they'll be called fire following plants. That usually means that their seeds will germinate when they come into contact with smoke or just heat. A lot of the times at the nursery, what we need to do is something called heat treating, where we'll just heat up some water and pour it over the seeds before we can actually plant them and expect them to germinate, because they're so used to following fires. And what that means in terms of fire resilience is that right after a fire, a lot of different species will come up. And in fact, a lot of the time you'll get peak biodiversity right after a fire because the canopy has been opened up, and a lot of things that are in the soil seed bank, that's basically all the seeds that drop onto the ground over multiple years. Those things will have a chance to come up, and so we get a lot of various wildflowers that need more sun, and you'll actually see super awesome super blooms right after a fire because they've gotten the canopy open and finally have a chance to come up. And that's very useful too because, again, if you're worried about mudslides after fires, you're going to have more diversity, more biodiversity in terms of the root structure. Now, one of the things that's important in terms of preventing erosion is you can't just have a bunch of the same plant. You can't have these invasive monocultures, because their roots, if they're all the same length, it's not actually very useful in terms of erosion, because then that depth of dirt will just fall off the hill. You need to have various different root lengths, and that's going to come with the various different plants. So when you have a high biodiversity coming up right after a fire, you're going to have some things with really deep roots, like our laurel sumac, like our oaks. You're going to have things with shallow roots, like more of our wildflowers. And so that's really important in order to keep a landscape going right after a fire. And this is something that all the indigenous inhabitants of Southern California knew. And so they would actually have, well, what we in restoration terms now call prescribed burns. They would do this fairly frequently around the places where they lived, because if they could control a burn beforehand and not let it come out of control and into their homes, they were able to instead make sure that they knew when it was going to happen, and they would also have it promote various kinds of wildland that they actually liked. So you would get more of the grasses that they would like, and you would get more of the wildflowers. One of my favorite native plants is the Quercus lobata, or the valley oak. This is a species of white oak. Now, this is very good for fire adaptation because it will get very tall, even taller than our coast live oaks, and it has very thick bark. So when there's a low burning fire, it will be able to have its canopy much higher above where anything is burning. And again, it also has very thick bark. So its more established trees are very good at surviving a fire. And then the younger trees are able to crown sprout if the fire kills all of their top growth. So overall, it's very well adapted to fires. Another one of my favorite plants is the laurel sumac. What I love about this one is just how resilient it is. You'll often see it by the sides of roads, and I always just kind of joke, well, I'll say, thanks for keeping the 405 from turning into a pile of mud, laurel sumac, because that's what they do. Also, they're just so pretty in terms of their leaves. I love the reddish that you get through here. And they are loved by birds. Their seed heads basically just look like anything you would give to your pet bird. And so it'll be covered in wild native birds through the entirety of the time when it has all of its seeds. And it also has cute little white flowers. So overall, it's just a wonderful hedge.